Hey guys, welcome back to Living in Indy. My name's Sarah Schaefer, your local Indianapolis realtor, and today we are going to be talking about 3 mistakes that first-time homebuyers make, especially in today's market. In 2022, what are we looking at in the Indianapolis metro area in terms of the market and how we should be behaving and how we should be responding to the current market? So the number one thing that I have noticed from buyers in this market is wanting to approach the situation with underbidding on properties. Now, I will say that there are small pockets of markets around the whole entire state of Indiana where it is not as competitive and you may be able to write a list offer or potentially underbid. But in pretty much all major cities in the Indianapolis metro area, we really do not have that luxury right now to be underbidding on properties. It is a seller's market. Don't let anybody tell you anything else. It's a seller's market, and what a seller's market is when there are more buyers than there are sellers. And so the inventory of homes is lesser than the amount of people who are currently actively searching for a home. And so that is going to make the demand of these homes rise, and that's going to make the value of the homes rise, because that is basic economics. And so right now we are in a seller's market, which is not going to allow for you to be underbidding on properties. More than likely, we're going to be bidding $5,000, $10,000, $15,000 over list price on a property. We might see the tide start to change, maybe by the end of this year, maybe next year, maybe a few years from now. I'm not really sure. I can't predict what's going to happen in the market, but this would not be a super spectacular time for you to be trying to get a house right now if you are wanting to underbid. That is really just not a realistic thing that we are going to be able to do right now, and I don't want you to waste your time and be disappointed. So tip number 2 is not wanting to get pre-approved. Pre-approval is really necessary right now in this market because homes are staying on the market for maybe 4 or 5 days at the very most, unless it's like an investment property or it's tenant occupied. Any single family residence that is pretty much able to be moved in immediately or pretty close to the closing date is going to be a very high demand and is going to be snatched off the market right away. And so we need to be prepared with pre-approval in hand to submit that with our offer. We really don't have time to waste, because if you find your dream home, then your dream home could be gone. There's also a tiny chance that it could go back on the market. In that particular situation, we do have this thing called a backup offer that I could submit for you. Basically, it would kind of hold your waiting spot in line while we go and shop for other properties. If you ended up getting under contract, then I can just resend the backup offer. Really, getting the pre-approval is super important because it allows us to do a variety of things. It allows for us to act quickly on a property. It allows for us to look for properties in your price range. And it allows for us to have a good idea of what kind of loan program you have, because different kinds of properties have different financing eligibility. And so some properties, like an investment property or maybe a property that is a little bit older and needs a bit of love and attention, maybe that property isn't going to do very well on an FHA appraisal. And so the buyers may want you to just have conventional or cash or VA. There's also another situation where there could be some other factor as to why you can't get financing. I did have a buyer last year that they had gotten under contract for a property, and we had found out that they had advertised the property as financeable, but that condominium was currently under pending litigation, and that disqualifies financing from most banks until that litigation is either resolved or dropped. So there's all kinds of different reasons why a home might be a certain loan program, but that's just another element of the home search process that really helps us, give us a lot of direction, and really gives you a really great idea of what you can get and what is available to you. Instead of just kind of looking at everything that's available, we're able to say, okay, you can have $220,000, 3-bed, 2-bath. It needs to be FHA financing approved, and that really gives us a much more specific way of looking at the open market instead of just looking at everything and then hoping that you could potentially be approved for that property. So I would highly highly recommend in this market to get approved, get an understanding of your loan portfolio. And also this will give you some time to maybe get your credit score up or get some things together that you need to get together before maybe you're even ready to start really being an active buyer in this market. Most pre-approvals are non-committal. My personal preferred lender, it's not a commitment. If you go ahead and get pre-approved, take a look at your loan profile and you're able to kind of assess your financial situation in the way that the lenders are going to view your financial situation. So there are a ton of benefits of getting pre-approved and talking to a lender before you are really ready to get out there and be an active buyer in this market. So the third tip that I could give to first-time home buyers to be successful in today's crazy seller's market is being prepared to be competitive with your offer. And so in the first point, I talked about being competitive with the purchase price and not wanting to underbid and more than likely going to have to overbid for properties. But kind of breaking down the purchase agreement and thinking contractually about how we can be very competitive. These are just a handful of ways that you as a buyer could be more competitive. If you have an idea of some of these different strategies, you'll be a little bit more prepared when it comes time to write the offer, as well as when you're getting prepared to start being an active buyer in this market, potentially be working on saving up some money or preparing yourself for some of these different options. So I'm gonna go ahead and get into some of these different options. One of the first ways that we can be super competitive is having an as-is addendum attached with the purchase agreement. So you can have that you waive the right to an independent inspection. You can have that you reserve the right to get an independent inspection. Within that, that is where you'll be able to go back and ask the seller for repairs. Now, if we choose that option, the seller is probably going to be a little less likely to choose that over somebody else right now with an as-is addendum, because that means that further in the transaction, they could potentially be liable for some monetary repairs, or you could potentially back out of the contract because they don't want to repair things, because you're fully within your right to back out of a contract at that point if you can't come to an agreement. Now, the as-is addendum allows you to still get an independent inspection. It still allows for you to back out of the contract under a few more specific guidelines than the right to reserve. The technicalities about the as-is addendum kind of break down into two things. So one, the seller submits a seller's disclosure form about the property when they list the property on the MLS. So if there's anything that the seller did not disclose, that's really not going to be enough reason for you to be able to mutually release from this contract, and you will more than likely lose your earnest money. And said that it was not broken and ends up being broken, we do have a little bit of recourse to be able to come back on that and either say, you told me this wasn't broken, it is broken. I either need to walk away from this property or we need to come to some sort of mutual agreement on how we're going to remedy this issue. Or there is a huge systematic problem. And so not everything falls under the systematic problems. Another way that we can be more competitive in this market is by offering an appraisal gap. And so what an appraisal gap is when you offer money, so maybe it's $5,000 or $7,000 or $2,000. It's really up to you and your financial situation, but in this market, we are offering very high over list price. And that really leads to the potential for us to not be hitting value when it comes time to get an appraisal done. And so even though you may be offering $40,000 over list price, if the appraisal does not come back in at value, that is not how much the seller is going to get from this transaction. The seller is going to get whatever the appraisal value is, because that's all that the bank is going to lend. They aren't going to lend any more money over the appraised amount. So if you offered $260,000 and it came in at $240,000, the bank is going to give you $240,000. By offering this appraisal gap, it's giving the seller some reassurance in, okay, if there is an appraisal issue, at least I'll be getting this additional $5,000. And so the seller's bottom line would really be more like $245,000, because you are going to be giving them that $5,000 at closing to make up for the appraisal gap. In a situation like that, there's really nothing that I can do for you in terms of negotiating you to keep your earnest money, because you broke the contract and there was nothing in the contract that legally allowed for you to get out of the contract. When it comes time to look at the inspection report, we really are looking for major issues. And so that comes down to the major systems of a home, which is like the HVAC, the foundation, the roof, plumbing, electrical. Those are the major systems of a home. And so if the entire HVAC unit is broken and it needs to be completely replaced and it's going to be $9,000 or $10,000, that would be a situation where you could release from the contract, because that really is going to impact the value of the home. You're going to see a significant difference in price of a 3-bedroom, 2-bath home with an HVAC unit and one without. So different things like that in the different systems are ways that you could be able to protect yourself from a home that kind of have some hidden problems and issues. But when we are submitting the as-is addendum, we are doing this to be competitive in today's market. And so this isn't an opportunity for us to try and either get out of the home because you decided that you aren't 100% in love with it anymore, or that there's one thing on the inspection report that you weren't particularly very happy about seeing on there. This is really just to make sure that the things that need to be working and that are major costs are working, and that everything that they disclose to us is in fact correct. It really doesn't go beyond that at all. And if you're going to want to choose the as-is addendum option to be more competitive, I really want for you to be aware of the parameters of that option, because it's not a free-for-all. Another way that you can be more competitive in today's market is by paying the seller's closing costs. There's title fees, there's taxes, there's commissions. This would essentially be causing you, the buyer, to maybe be bringing another $1,000 or $2,000 to closing, but it's going to look very nice and very attractive to the sellers, because that is more money that they're going to be able to keep in their pocket from the proceeds of the sale of their home. Another way that we can be more competitive is by submitting an escalation clause. And so essentially what that does is, let's say the property is $150,000. We offered $162,000. But you're pre-approved all the way up to $180,000. And so what we can do in increments of our choice, I usually pick like $1,500 or $2,000 increments. And this is a great way for us to be able to beat out other people's offers if the seller is really looking for price point. So if they get another offer for $169 or $172, that's going to allow for us to kind of climb to the top of the list again. When we're having 70 offers submitted on a property, yes, I have had houses that we have submitted offers on, and they have had 70 offers submitted on a property. Another way that we can be more competitive is by offering a shorter approval time. And so typically I write my contracts for a 30-day approval. That's usually what most lenders want you to put on your contracts, so that they have plenty of time. But sometimes we have a really straightforward client, or we've already been able to send them into underwriting. We may be able to close you in 2 or 3 weeks. And so that allows for you as the buyer to put a 20 or 25-day close, shortening that time and really showing the seller that I really want this property. I'm prepared to close as quickly as possible. So a shorter approval time and a shorter closing date is a really great way to be a little bit more competitive. Another way is to have a more flexible possession. And so typically what I do is I write that we would like possession at closing, and then I send in the email that if they need us to be more flexible on possession, to send over a counter offer. Another way that we can be a little bit more competitive is to offer a larger escrow deposit. So typically the industry standard is to submit a 1% escrow deposit. However, all of that money stays with the transaction. So if you submit $2,000 or $3,000 or $4,000 for your escrow deposit, then that also really shows the sellers that you are really interested in this property. And also, if for whatever reason you want to back out of the contract, the seller will get to keep that money in most instances. And so that's also an added bonus to the seller, because all of that time that you had that property taken off the market, whether it was going through the inspection period, or there are literally buyers who just decide that they don't want that property anymore. You really just need to decide that you don't want that money anymore, because that money is really what holds the transaction in limbo and is the liability. It's also referred to as good faith money. Another way is to have no contingencies. Typically, this is referring to either the sale of your home. So if you submit an offer and you're also selling your home right now and you want the purchase of this home to be contingent on the sale of your other home, that's also not going to be as attractive as somebody else's offer that doesn't have any contingencies. There are a variety of other different contingencies, and that is something that really boils down to each individual and their situation. But overall, the less contingencies you have, the more attractive your offer is. And the very last thing that I could recommend to have a more competitive offer is to pay the seller's taxes. And so when we go to closing, because Indiana pays taxes in the arrears, everybody kind of has to settle up taxes at closing. And so again, this would be an additional cost out of your pocket, but this would also be something that is attractive to the sellers because it's usually a couple $1,000s on most properties. That kind of boils down to also a variety of things, area, county, if they filed their tax exemptions. This would also be a great way to keep some more cash in the seller's pocket and make your offer a little bit more attractive and a lot more competitive in today's market. So just to recap on today's video, I explained 3 ways that buyers in today's market can be a little bit more competitive and some mistakes that first-time home buyers might make when they're entering today's competitive market. The first way, wanting to underbid, not wanting to get pre-approved, and having some competitive strategies to be able to put together to make your offer a little bit more attractive. As always, if you guys have any questions, you can reach me on any of my social medias, as well as my website, my email, my phone number are all linked in the description box below. Also, if you haven't already subscribed, go down there and hit that subscription button and join the Living in Indy fam. We put out new videos every week on Tuesdays, and we are really hoping to expand that more coming in the future. So show us some love in the comments, show us some love with that like, and definitely share this with a friend or family who is potentially looking to purchase a home or enter this market, because this will be a really great handful of things to consider if you're considering being an active buyer, if you're considering purchasing later in the year, or maybe even at the beginning of next year, depending on how the market continues to progress. But right now in 2022, these are some great things that you could be doing as an active buyer to be more competitive in this market. Thank you guys so much for watching this episode of Living in Indy. I will see you guys next time.